All right, everyone. China is slowly losing its trade war with the United States. At this point, it becomes basically the following question. Is China going to stick it out until after the election and hope that Trump is not the person that's elected? That's basically, can their economy take the strain for more than another subsequent year? Because the U.S. economy, while it's affected by, having a tariff war, having trade disputes between the U.S. and China, we are affected far less than China is affected. Meanwhile, Trump is about to score possibly a huge optics win with the nation of Mexico. If he can get the Mexican government, in principle, to stand by the idea of border control, to erect a significant fortification on its southern border, potentially with U.S. discretionary spending, which is totally different from a national emergency declaration and still fits into the budget of the Pentagon potentially. If Trump can have a wall built down there, in order for Mexico to avoid any tariff problems. If that happens, it's a huge victory, kills two birds with one stone, and is going to make China look real fucking scared. The problem for China is that it's an exporter. That is, here's the way the U.S. and China trade deals work. Here's how basically our economies intertwine. We need a lot of cheap goods, raw goods, cheaply manufactured items, stuff like that. We need businesses over there. They do assembly and so forth. Cheaper stuff, lower end industry. They need in return from us certain agricultural goods, which is funny because they've poisoned 5% of their agricultural soil beyond use. They're trying to fix that now. They become environmentalist communists now, which is very interesting. To become the Green Party of China at some point. Then they'd have to change their color scheme. But we sell them that and also heavier end goods, more sophisticated materials, as well as we simply buy a lot. There's a trade deficit. The problem for China is that we can get the cheap goods elsewhere. They can't really get some of those higher end goods, at least for the same price, from many other countries, because there aren't that many countries in the world that are willing and able to supply them the amount that they need, the sophistication that they need, like Japan maybe. But Japan and China spar constantly. If they think trade relations are bad between the U.S. and China, my goodness, remember when Japan discovered that basically subsurface lake of easily dredged up rare earth mineral sludge offshore, and China had a huge problem with that and was like, well, no, some map from the 1800s says the island is that it's near is ours or something like that, and it's like nobody else in the world recognizes it. Japan goes in and is vacuuming it up, I think, as we speak. It's worth trillions of dollars of rare earth minerals. China has problems. The problem is that we can easily trade out China for India or Thailand or parts of Africa now, West Africa, and other places in order to get the same kind of goods. It would take time, it would take strain on our economy, but the free market can fix it. They can't find another buyer for their cheap goods because nobody else doesn't already have a supplier able to supply them, and or China's already in part supplying them to begin with, and there's no additional demand. It's very funny because China has one of the most insular, meddled-in, protectionist economies in the world, and yet it's a victim of the world's free market situation. And there was an article, this was weeks ago, I think, talking about how there was a new Cold War, but this time it was economic and it was with China. It was fundamentally an economic and technological war between two frames of mind. The intervened-in sort of insular economics and tech of China, the censorship and so forth, and the Western world, which was more open, more laissez-faire, although that's not entirely the case on either end, and I would love to make a video on that subject too. Not entirely. Just like China's a little bit more free market in some aspects now than some people realize, there is a hyper-capitalistic element in parts that's been employed within some of the free economic zones and shit like that within China, which, by the way, brings a much higher return on investment than anything that the government centrally plans. It's very funny. The more free market it is, the better it is for China, and yet for some reason they stubbornly cling to this sort of antiquated feudalistic system that they've been using forever in order to administer their economy. Probably because otherwise liberals might crop up and you'll get another Tiananmen Square. Oh my goodness, it'd be terrible. They might have to reform their system and actually be a free country. I'm surprised that people haven't simply fucking overthrown the nation of China's government and said to hell with it. I mean, we've got the manpower, we got the resources and economy. There's no reason for us to have to deal with fucking communism. The communists failed. The free trade zones within the country are doing better than anything else, so why don't we just switch over entirely? They've managed to convince their population that the idea is scary, I think, which is rather sad. but they're going to lose the trade war. All these people betting against Trump in regards to these, they did the same thing with the USMCA. They said, well, Trump can never get certainly Trudeau into the building to negotiate. That was false. Within a few months, they hammered out an agreement. A few months later, it was signed. NAFTA gets overhauled. Okay, so there's one victory. They said he could never go toe-to-toe with Europe on automotive. He did. He backed down Germany in a couple of days. I think it was only one day, basically. He threatens tariffs, and they say, okay, we'll remove the tariffs. Basically, they tried to avoid having any conflict, which was great. They said he couldn't get Mexico to negotiate. The idea that Mexico would build a wall, now looks, like a distinct possibility. Only it won't be on our border, it'll be on the southern border of Mexico. That would be interesting. It'd be funny if Trump's wall was built in another country. That would be a projection of power now, wouldn't it? It'd be right in line with the Monroe Doctrine. It would be great. It would also be cheaper, because the labor would be taking place in Mexico where wages are lower. We could fucking pay for it at that point. Nobody in the U.S. would care. I think it would be a great idea. I think it would be hilarious. Or maybe have it built on the northern border of Mexico so it's like a de facto U.S. border wall, but it's like jointly administered or something. Create like a buffer zone between the two countries, and we can just take care of the problem. I'm just joking about that. But as far as China goes, because they are the seller and we're the buyer, the customer is always right. It's going to be very, very difficult for China to get into a position where they're arguably third or fourth as far as our trade partners, but we're their biggest trade partner. We've got the projection capabilities. We've got a much higher overall economic capability and a much wider sphere of trade. China can't win in that struggle. All they can do is stonewall and hope Trump gets kicked out and the trade war ends without, any further problems. Can their economy take the strain? The U.S. economy can. Some people are saying, well, the market futures are down a few hundred points. A new recession is beginning. Okay, maybe. That could happen. By the way, it has nothing to do with a Chinese trade war. It's funny because I seem to remember Democratic politicians, too, for years rambling about China this. China manipulates its currency. China manipulates its markets. China's screwing us on trade. China keeps not playing by the rules that everyone else plays by. China hacks things. China does this, that, and the... Okay, well, that was always a problem. It was sort of like when the Democrats talked about the border crisis, and Obama and Clinton and people like him. Oh, we need to do something. It's a big problem. People need to come in legally and respect our laws, blah, blah, blah. But nothing ever fucking got done. Trump gets in, he says the same things, and he's actually walking the walk. He's the first person since Reagan to at least try to tackle these issues of foreign currency manipulation and trade meddling on one hand, and also our own border, number two. Reagan did better on the former than on the latter, although he was an interventionist in some cases. Look at Iran-Contra and some of these other problems that we've had. But I think Trump is doing a very good job on these. Yeah, I expect that the trade war with China will be won before the election. The reason why is because I don't think that eventually the free market that does exist there will exert influence on the Chinese government and say, look, we're not going to survive this. We can't go another fucking year. At a minimum, you're asking us to go more than a year with slowed down growth and stuff. That's terrible. China needs sustained growth in order to keep getting investment to feed more growth. It's sort of like a self-sustaining system. If any one of these links becomes weak and breaks, China collapses. The Chinese economy would revert to an agrarian society overnight almost. You do realize that the Chinese economy is built upon giving cheap shit to the Western world. Well, if its biggest buyer basically says to hell with you and starts buying from India or something like that, it's going to be a real problem. The real problem, though, the biggest problem that China has ultimately is that a lot of its economy is built on foreign investment. Because people would say, well, China's growing at 6-7% or something, I'm going to invest in China. Like 10 years ago, if you'd given me $1 million, said, where are you going to put it? China. Of course I'm going to put it in China. It's growing quickly, increasing middle class. You've got domestic consumption rising as well. I know that the Chinese government, as long as I don't try to meddle in their politics, they're not going to kick me out. They're not going to nationalize my business. They want more investment. They don't want to do anything to spook the investors, the capitalists, oddly, in other nations. I can do whatever I want. I can build my gumball factory there, and it'll be fine. I'll get a huge return. I can use tax havens. My goodness, that $1 million will be $1 billion in 10, 20 years. It'd be easy. But if Chinese growth slows down, then so does the investment. What does that cause? More slowdown of growth. And so it's a death spiral. China, I labeled a paper palace, or paper tiger, basically 4 or 5 years ago, because that's how its economy has worked this entire time. The second that the illusion of sustainable growth a la China ends, is the moment that they begin to slide backwards. It'll cause market panic. Oh, it'll cause problems for us too. I'm not rooting for China to collapse and become a potato patch, because ultimately that will feed into the U.S. economy. The contagion would be huge. World's second largest economy is in free fall. What the fuck do you think is going to happen to the rest of the world's markets? It'll shatter them. Yes, we'll enter a recession at that point, but they'll get it way worse. For them, it'll be a depression. Ultimately, we can get the goods and feed our factories elsewhere. China doesn't have that ability. And so, yeah, I think China gets the worst. When people do like the death of the dollar thing, like you basically buy gold now and led to, because the dollar is going to collapse and the U.S. will no longer be the leader of the world and will be a second-rate power and will be run by, your children will speak Chinese and Arabic and stuff. No, I don't think so. No, I'm not worried about that. I'm a little bit more optimistic. It's like during the Great Recession, people thought, oh my God, basically the United States is receding into the folds of history. Pretty soon we'll be not a major player anymore. Trump out of nowhere. Free market fixed it now, didn't it? The money talked. That's about all. Peace out.